5 days you work, 1 whole day to play. Come on, everybody, wear your roller skates today. It's Saturday, 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 it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday,
Saturday with Renee. Yes, welcome back, everybody, to Black Liberation Media and to episode 122 consecutively of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnson. I am Jared Ball, very happy to be your co-host. Please like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, put a comment in the live chat or in the comment section if you're seeing this later, and put this in your socials, and do any and everything else you think you can to support the show and the platform. Renee.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. How you feeling?
I've got my cup of coffee now. So in like 3 minutes, I'll be a lot better. That's what we're going with this morning.
Right on. Right on.
How are you doing?
I was already having we got some household first world bad news. Oof. So we're gonna have to just recover from the shock as a family from that nonsense. People out here making ridiculous decisions, but we're gonna come back to that at another time.
Uh-oh.
But worse, I'm feeling now, never mind before we get to all the serious world seriousness that we're gonna get to today. But Demond Wilson Lamont from Sanford and Son passed away today.
No.
Or yesterday. And
I gotta tell my husband.
Babe. As some of my homies have already pointed out, the big dummy has gone to the sky with father and Elizabeth and Elizabeth. But no, but seriously,
sucks,
like that was not, that was just a little bit of, sprinkling some bad news on this global nightmare we facing. And
every day, man, every day.
Yeah. So for some of us of certain generation, it's certain time and place, Sanford and Son, for all of its contradictions, played kind of maybe a too big a role, I would say, in my life.
Yeah. And this is also correct. I don't know that they're, for me, in the same category, but the Home Alone mom did pass away. She was also in Beetlejuice.
Catherine O'Hara. No, she's been beyond the silly Hollywood stuff. She was in a lot of really good movies.
Mm-hmm.
She was a legend. So respect to her as well.
That
no
was
doubt.
Yesterday. Yeah.
But Catherine O'Hara was actually, she was dope. She was in a lot of, actually, I don't know about her politics or her off-screen life, but what she did on screen was often very good.
Yeah,
so
I know I saw a quick reel of her, somebody asking, like, what's the role you most want to be remembered for? And her answer was being a mother.
Oh, wow.
It's like, you know what?
That was good.
I like that answer. That's a good answer.
It's a good slick and a nicely political one too for her career,
right?
In terms of being, judicious and fair, because she did a lot, man. She was in a lot of movies.
She did,
and she was a very good character play. She even showed up on my Curb Your Enthusiasm. Though I think it happened. I actually never saw it. I just saw a clip of it because I stopped watching the show once they.
Yeah.
They did. They. Oddly, I admit this didn't fully get me off the show, but they had this odd Palestinian arc that just sort of stayed away from being fully wrong, and then they did the. But then what really I admit that made me fully stop is when they brought Kramer back and tried to cleanse Michael Richards, and I was like, I can't. And had JB Smooth playing as a brother in a bow tie and as part of that attempt to cleanse. And I was like,
his whole role was it was questionable at best.
I do want to say before we get started with I had so much fun with this. I want to shout it out again. Please, folks, if you can make it through the marathon live streams of Carlos the Deculturation, or at least check the clip on my Instagram, because we had a funny moment while he was going through tearing up some white rad lib or whatever he called, whatever they are that he's always making fun of. He ended up showing a clip from an early appearance of Farrakhan on Donahue. And there's this moment, and I happen to be in the live chat. And as as Carlos is going through this, you see in the background a clip of my brother, my young, full head of hair.
Is that your brother? Then?
Yeah, he was sitting behind because he was always with Farrakhan for at the time, and so he was behind. He just happened to be sitting behind with a big grin on his face. And I was in the chat like, that's my brother. So it was like this funny moment during his live stream. So I
actually saw that Donahue of all things. Like,
yeah.
Like I remember, because Donahue and what was her name, Sally Jesse with the red glasses and all those daytime shows.
But Donahue used to like try to every once in a while do something.
Yeah, he tried to do something legit every now and again. Yeah.
But before he passed, I was at an early media reform conference after he had been fired from MSNBC. And I happened to be sitting right behind Phil Donahue at this conference, this media reform conference. And I promise you, I had this thought. I said, if Donahue is where I'm at, it's really over. If Phil Donahue was sitting right in front of me at a media reform conference, it's a wrap. But anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, probably. So, all right.
So we don't need to delay too much at all.
Yeah.
Definitely. R.I.P. Rest in power.
And Catherine.
There's a lot. So this is probably, it took us a little bit to figure out a date that was going to work for everybody because folks be busy, man. And, sometimes I don't know why I'm so busy because I ain't got no job, Tommy. Like, I don't understand. But I feel like I never stop. Like, my alarm goes off at 6:15. And at like 1:30, I'm like, oh, let me go to bed. Like 1:30 a.m. I'm like, okay, let me go to bed. So I can
somehow you probably work harder without the job.
Squeezing. Yo, it's brutal. It's brutal. But before we start, I want to shout out Brian Quoba. See how tired gets you? Mm-hmm. So Brian flew up from Memphis on Thursday, and he has sat for 2 in-person panels on his book. One at the at a wonderful old school black bookstore in downtown Newark called Source of Knowledge, and then with my folks at the Hub yesterday, and they were 2 totally different conversations about the same book with the same author, and it was dope. He does a really good public conversation. I was like, this is dope. We got to bring him back when it's not 10 degrees outside because it was cold. And we had all kinds of first world dramas that I don't want to even embarrass myself telling on the live stage. But it was dope. And I can't wait for it to get warmer so we can bring him back and get some more people out. And then on Sunday, and I'll make sure that I find the link and share it in the chat. If folks are available Sunday at 6 p.m., Brian is also going to do a fully online presentation on his book and Black history and Hubert Harrison and the struggle for liberation. And he'll be doing that as a favor to me for the National Black Caucus of the Green Party, which I did not know Brian was a Green Party voter all these years. So shout out to Brian for that. So I'll make sure I drop that link in the chat for folks to join if they're available. Zoom's always a nice, anybody can come. You ain't got to get dressed. You don't got to go.
But please do. But please do. I'm still traumatized by had that student show up in my Zoom class without a shirt on, laid up in his bed, like he was posing for album cover. I was like, son, please. Everybody put some clothes on, whether you turn the camera on or not. Anyway, let's go. Put another layer on. That's what I'm at. That's what I'm saying. Everybody put one more layer on.
Oh man.
No, but that's dope. Yeah.
Yeah, it was dope. It really was. It was dope. And I highly, highly recommend if folks can get Brian to come out. He does like a whole thing before he starts his talk where he welcomes the ancestors, which is beautiful, and it like really situates the room. And it was dope. It was dope. Shout out to Brian. It was dope. And he's just a nice person. Like, I like when you meet people in person for the first time. You're like, oh, all right, you're a nice person. This could work. Like, we could be cool. This is cool. Because, you know, not everybody's the same in person.
No. And Stephen, I am not this, but I do recognize the reference. So I'll at least make that admission. I am not a never nude, but I do appreciate that energy. And I get the reference. So salute to Arrested Development. All right. Sorry, Renee and everything.
No, all good. And listen, so do not feel bad if you want to go watch the People's Forum, y'all.
Oh,
like,
yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
This is, you know, this will be here. So feel free. Go do that. Watch us later. Like I have no.
Yeah, it's guilt-free viewing over here.
Yeah, guilt-free viewing. I mean, you're gonna miss a good conversation.
Oh, no doubt.
Live,
so make sure you come back. You know. Yeah. But we understand. It's all good.
We understand. But I mean, I guess let's just pull them up if y'all are ready. Let's go.
Well, first, I did want to, because I do blame StreamYard for this. But first of all, welcoming back Lara, Samantha, welcome back. Good to see you both again.
So good to see you.
It's good to be here.
That we got this to work and that we figured out like a date that everybody could do. Folks are very busy. And I think Lara flies more than anybody I know, which is saying a lot.
This is true. You caught me.
Yeah, you fly a lot. And Samantha, congratulations again, because you had to take a little break to go graduate and get your diploma. And so congrats on completing your master's program. And a note for everybody, if you have not read the work, that was part of what brought Samantha to us, which was part of your program at your master's degree. Highly recommended.
Thank you.
But why don't we start? Definitely. Why don't we start with the brief intro, because I'm sure there might be somebody who doesn't know who you both are, but let's make sure that they at least know who you are first. So Sam, why don't you go first, and then Lara, you can take over when Sam is done.
Well, I guess I'm Palestinian and Ukrainian, and I worked in Hollywood for a couple decades, and then I did my master's degree, and it brought me to all of you. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, where I am.
Hey, folks. Thanks for having us on. I mean, I love spending Saturdays with you both. So these are true comrades. It's always great. My name is Lara Sheehi, and what am I? I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm Lebanese Arab, both very important to the forward-facing work that I do. I'm also the host of Psychic Militancy Podcast. Now that's a new thing since the last time, I think, right? One time we were on a fundraising thing together.
This is the first time that you're here since you started. Yes,
exactly. So just excited to hang with you all and think through this shit, disrupt settler colonial myths.
Have to. And I just want to say to the audience, Samantha's attempt to like quietly pretend like she don't know all the shit she know has me a little mind blown right now. So Samantha also used to work at Disney and has literally the inside track on how first world media tricks us all into thinking we're learning something that really has nothing to do with the point of what we're watching. And so as much as she is not going to say it, every time someone brings up Samantha's name to me, they're like, she's amazing. The information she has is crazy. And so, like, we're between the two of them. I don't really know whose brain is like more amazing, frankly, but it's always fun because I always learn so much when I get to speak with you both. And quietly, like I'd be pulling them both on Zooms, like, what are y'all doing? Let's chat, let's get together. So I get all the good stuff offline because I proudly and excitedly call them both sisters. So
same here. And make sure, folks, to check out, you probably have seen Sam's work with our comrade Jared on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, but that Imperial 80s, that most recent one, yeah, you got to check it out if you haven't.
Thank you. And the ones I did on I Mix What I Like, because we got into some good stuff on Andor, even though I don't think I'm still learning to articulate myself. So I hope the stuff came across, but.
Watch all of it. It's all been great, but definitely the Imperial 80s joints are, and that one in particular as well was really good. So definitely make sure everybody you're watching all of these. Yeah,
definitely. So the reason that you all get both of them today is because over these past few months, Samantha has been consistently reminding me that Canada is a hot mess. And so we had these conversations and we were talking about this. And then I remembered that Lara also lived in Canada for a while. And in fact, when your family was forced to leave Lebanon, that's where you went. And so there's a lot of information. I think for me, Canada has quietly existed in the shadow of the US in a way that allows the governmental structure of Canada to pretend like it's not as bad as the US, like, oh, we're just in the shadow, don't do the same thing. It's still like, it's still a colony of the UK, of like it's still under British rule, which is also crazy when you think about it. And so like there are all these things that I think like conversationally just don't happen, mostly because it gets to exist in the shadow of the madness that comes out of the United States. And so there's a lot to talk about. And so this is going to end up being a series. I didn't tell you that, but I got the list from Sam and I just realized I don't think I forwarded it to you, but there's no way we can get through all of this information in one session. And so we're going to have to figure out a series, maybe like every other month we can find a time and then we'll just go to the next topics, whatever's next on the list. But I do think it's important that we register like the reality of living in a settler colony, right? The ability for less populated, because Canada's not small, it's just got less people than the US. So for less populated settler colonies to get away with the chaos that they get away with, because the US is just so big and just overwhelmingly imperial. And so part of my desire to look at this is because I do feel like in our examination of Canada, we can get to really expose some of the things about the imperial core that exists in a place that no one's paying attention to, right? And so that's really how this all started. And so I'm thrilled to have you both here to have this conversation. And I don't know, well, we started with Sam for intro. So Lara, why don't you talk about like your time in Canada and where you were in Canada, and then we can shift to Sam, who still lives in Canada. And so yes. we'll do it that way. And then we got some new members and stuff. So we see you, but let us get through this part and then we'll circle to the stars. All right.
Awesome. Welcome, new members. You've chosen the right place to be. So I'm grateful I got, invited into this, and anytime Renee asks me to join a conversation with Sam and Jared, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But it so happens that, as Renee said, I have captive, settler colonial citizenship to the state now known as Canada. And that happened because my parents immigrated there during the Civil War in Lebanon first. And I think my folks were like the only immigrant family that said we're going for 7 years and actually stayed 7 years only and didn't just stay forever, for which I'm very grateful because I was actually raised in Lebanon as a result of that. And I think that it would have changed the course of my life, because when you live as an immigrant, and I wasn't even first generation, I was, my folks and I got there at the same time. So it wouldn't have been, but there's a different racialization. And I think then you fast forward to 2006, when we were evacuated by the Canadian government because of Israeli siege on Lebanon. So I have these very distinct moments. Both of those times it was Alberta, Canada, which is the most conservative province in the country. Their succession also, like, people think about Quebec as being the ones that want to secede, and that is true. But there's an Alberta like separatist movement that's based on conservatism. That's where a lot of oil is, by the way. So like the town I lived in was 1,000 population town, and it was oil rigs and ice truckers. And so I have always lived with this knowledge. It was deeply, deeply, deeply racist. And I will say, I went there when I was 5, and I was then socialized very quickly into learning what anti-Blackness was from being there. It doesn't matter. And this is what is important about understanding about anti-Blackness, is that if the world is structured through anti-Blackness, it doesn't, of course it matters if you're Black, and also how does anti-Blackness get mobilized and used in ways for anybody that represents not white. And I think this was the experience, right? And the town that I lived in, as I said, it was 1,000 population town in rural prairie land, Alberta. And we were 2 Lebanese families, 1 Korean family and 1 Chinese family. My parents and my uncle owned the diner. The Chinese family owned the Chinese restaurant, and the Korean family owned the Safeway. And like, that's how we existed. And everybody else was white. And I'm not, there wasn't even shades of white. It was like everybody else was white. And there was like a church on every corner. So, but I remember very early on learning how deeply ingrained settler colonial logics and anti-Indigenous sentiment was, which of course is wrapped up in racism, but there's a very particular type of cruelty and perniciousness when it comes towards Indigenous peoples of the state now known as Canada. And it has different variations depending on what province you live in. But this was so, like, I remember as a 5-year-old being like, what? I knew that Indigenous people, this was a land of Indigenous people, but hearing the ways that people talked about things, like saying stuff like, oh, the most horrific stereotypes that we know, right? That white people and settlers mobilize, these inversions they make, like somehow Indigenous people are the intruders. Indigenous people are the ones who are, quote unquote, living off the land and getting everything for free. And then, of course, later you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, you stole this land. Any promises you've done, you've broken most of them. Anything you could, quote unquote, give Indigenous people is nothing because you murdered and fucking stole their land. So I've never lived with the myth of Canada being better because I experienced it firsthand. But it's always fascinating to see how committed Canadians, and I'll say white Canadians and settlers, are to the myth of them being nicer than the United States, which just kind of gets into what you were saying, Renee, is that it's always in reference point to just how absurdly cruel and dominating the United States is. And that has been the best thing for them because that myth is always there. I don't know if you all know this, but like when people started to really hate the United States, like I think Iraq War, Afghanistan, I know people have hated the United States for a long time, but when it became like outwardly, like nobody wants to see somebody from the United States anywhere, folks from the United States would put Canada patches on their backpacks when they went to Europe because they're like, fuck, people hate us. We can't put an American flag. We just put a Canada flag instead. And I always found that funny because I was just like, I have the same response when I see both of those flags, right? And because it is fundamentally an annihilationist, expansionist, settler colonial project that is deeply, deeply, deeply based in racism. And we can talk about like what it was like to get evacuated and the bills that were passed after the fact and, their immigration policies, which again, anytime you have immigration, it's always in, reference point to Indigenous folks and built on their backs. But it's a deeply fucking troubled place. And what they do when like immigrants come in and what they teach them, teach them how to wash their hands as a way to become Canadian, by the way. Like these are actually steps they have to go through, like civilizational, courses to become citizens. That still happens today. That's not like of the past. So I'm just happy we're finally, people are just saying this. You didn't have to watch Carney the other day talk about the ways that Canada has looked away from all the human rights abuses and imperial plunder that the United States has done to know that Canada has always been involved in eliminationist and settler colonial policies. But I'm glad it's finally out, and here we are to make sure of it.
I just wanted to throw in that I was doubly interested in this as well, because in terms of Black history, Canada is like a rom-com. It's like treated like a rom-com, like it's where you see this wonderful movie, but you never see what happens to the relationship after they run, the happily ever after credits roll. But so because Canada is often depicted as the destination of choice for escape. Even Malcolm's line about the real Mason-Dixon line is the Canadian border gives mythology that once you cross it, there is something better. But then we often don't follow the histories of those Black communities that would escape, settle, have experience, like those history, and then the history of Canada itself gets suppressed, as you were just explaining. So I just was, just
there's like a whole thing there to talk about that goes back like over 100 years, I think, too. Sorry, and because I don't want to derail it, because like there's so much to go on, but even specifically around that, and the way that Canadians perceive their relationship to Black people and to Black Canadians. And I can't speak as someone that's lived that experience, but there is this weird like I remember, like, I think Birth of the Nation was like one of the most, like, to this day, one of the most lauded films in Canada. Like I mean, to this day, people don't know, like, they don't know about it. It was actually, because of like whatever, and like they don't want to show that it's actually been like really erased from collective memory. And I would argue that probably the average white Canadian settler hasn't even heard of that film. But back when that film came out, it ran in Canada for like a couple years. And there were a lot of government efforts to get everybody in Canada to see that film. They had railways built to small towns, and they did these expositions around it, and they got Canadian people to like see that film. And it was widely celebrated. And they also would have and they would find, I remember reading this one article, because you can go through these archives, and read articles from the papers at that time and everything. And there was this one article that, they found one Black man that like was saying good things or something about the film. Like it was a progressive thing that, that there were Black actors, and it showed like it was like a great thing to be included. So they found this one guy that they would then parade, kind of like that crazy, Palestinian guy that Israel always wheels out, that like to talk about, or whatever. Like, so you can actually see this in the papers at the time, like referencing this guy that, advocated for this film. And they also used the film, they were using it as a way to unite the discrepancies between white Canadians at the time, because, and I need to rewind. I really think that people need to look at Canada like Israel, and I'll go into like specifically why that particular settler colonial project. But I think also at that time, because of the way that they were building it's kind of like looking at Tel Aviv or 48 Israel and then the West Bank. And they were bringing in all these Eastern European immigrants to be the people to settle into, the prairies and like farm the land and do all of these things. And the waves of immigrants were coming in the late 1800s. And there was a big discrepancy between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans in Canada, and they couldn't unite them. So that film was an opportunity to try to unite a white Canada. And they used Black communities as that opportunity. And there's just such a huge culture of denialism, and Canada's just already been like, and this is a country that is very primed on genocide, because the genocide was ongoing at that time of Indigenous people and pushing them out of their land. So sorry, I'm tangenting a bit, but like there is like a really sordid history, and they used the mythology of, and this is where I think Canada is really fascinating, because we pick and choose when we're aligned with the US and the British. And I think that that's also really important. Like, we are still a monarchy. We're not a republic. We're a monarchy. King Charles is our head of state, regardless of all the speeches that Carney wants to do. He actually has no authority to change any of our constitutional legislation or any of these things. He can pass bills without parliamentary consensus if King Charles just like signs a paper for him. And Carney is like besties with King Charles with his like nice long history in the UK. And so we Canadians as a culture also default to that we are better than the States because we were abolitionists, because we never participated, like, you know, that we aligned with Britain and that we condoned, condemned, sorry, they did condone slavery, but they publicly condemned it. And they say that, you know, that, so they adopt this mythology that like when it suits Canada, we're like the British and we're better than the Americans in these ways and stuff. And then, you know, I think
which is hysterical, by the way, to say that somehow being like the British is a good thing.
But they're proud.
Okay.
There's a pride, you know, behind this. And like, you know, to this day, people have almost birthday party celebrations every time like some royal family member that's like 78th in line to the throne has a wedding or something, and they dress up and they celebrate it or whatever. And so there is that history, and then they say those things, and they use that film to also try to close the borders, that they didn't want Black Americans to come into Canada because they were like, oh, well, there's all this racism in the US that we don't have here. So if these Black people come to Canada, they'll bring like the tension of that racism into our country. And this was in the newspapers at that time. Like, there's this big archive of like all the papers at that time. And if you comb through, because these articles were really short, you know, they just wrote 2 paragraphs at the time in the paper. So it's easy to find them. But there is also that mythology, and there were Black communities, towns that were established that got, you know, destroyed and dispersed. And so, yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, Lara. Like, there's a whole thing just with that. And it's, and a lot of it is because, you know, and that's the thing, because this society was primed on genocide, and there was never a sense of establishing Canada. Like, not that I justify anything with the US, but at least you had a bunch of white people that were like, we don't want the monarchy to be the boss of us, so we're going to make our own country. Canada's always been about establishing a factory. Like, it's a Disneyland factory for empire. And so there was never this sense of like nationality until later. Like, it had to really be forged after the factory was established. So everyone that came to this factory in the first place was like there for the genocide. You know, they were primed for this. And that's something I actually want to talk about though too, is like the Ukrainian immigration that came in, because I do have family ties to that and stuff as well.
Before you missed your assignment, which, because somebody inevitably is going to be like, well, what's she know about Canada? So can you please tell the people why you know Canada so well? Because you still didn't tell anybody.
I know.
Stop. No, you get. I know this. Y'all, just so you know, this is so a conversation with Samantha, and it's in part like why, like, we get on a call sometimes, and I look up and we've been on the call for like 2 hours, and we're just yapping, and it's because we both get on these literal like tangents. Like, we just start yabbering, and it's the two of us. It's not just her, because I am a yabberer. I don't know if y'all know this, but I am definitely a chatter. But before you tell everybody about the Ukrainian movement, because that is important, but explain where you are, how long you've been there, and then tie it to your own family, because I want to make sure that people understand that your knowledge is grounded not just in the fact that you study it, but because you're actually Canadian. Like, you live in Canada. You know, you're not Canadian, but you live in Canada.
Yeah, I do, I do need to point out that, like, obviously in Canada, I'm here in the settler sphere, and sort of in relation to that thing that I brought up about Disney World. I grew up here. I'm born Canadian. Like, I'm a, whatever they call, like, I was born here. And so being born within the Disneyland factory project, that's the life that you live. Like, I was raised as a settler. I was raised in this kind of space. And I guess but it's always been, and I know I brought this up on your show before, but because I'm like, my father came from Palestine, like, he's a Nakba survivor. And he, because of the events that he lived through, and to be able to help his family, and because, Palestinians were not allowed, like, because he was in 48, they weren't allowed in his time. I mean, even still to this day, like, he couldn't study medicine or get a full education, because, like, we see that now, like, even abroad, like they try to block Palestinians from learning engineering and medicine and, like, things that could actually help their people. So he was able to get a scholarship and get some support to be able to go to the US first, and then he made his way to, like, New York, like, he's in the Bronx, and then he went to Chicago, and then he went to Toronto, and then he came to Montreal, and then that's where he met my mother. So and being Palestinian in Canada, you are, now I realize, like, we are essentially treated in the same way. Like, I mean, we are Indigenous, and because Canada is I would argue, the twin sibling of Israel. I think that Britain established these two state projects at a similar time, really. Like, even though Israel was, like, like, formally established much later than Canada, and that does change, like, Canada's timeline is a little bit different, but these are both British projects, and one was a military base and one was a factory, and that's basically how I see them. So growing up as Palestinian, like, we couldn't get into schools, and we were removed from schools because we said that we were Palestinian. So we had to lie about our identity in order to get into schools in the areas that we lived in. And so there was never, for me, a feeling that this was my country. Like, I was always in fear of being discovered, or, like, you're just walking around, like, knowing that you are not accepted in this place, even though I am born Canadian. And then on the other side of, like, I have a Ukrainian heritage, and that's also a very, like, it's something that really frustrates me. The majority of Ukrainian people in the diaspora in Canada are, like, it's true that, they're very imperial, like, they're very much in support of these NATO things, and like, there's a very problematic culture that permeates that. But there's also, like, complexities in it, because, I do also come from a descendancy in Ukraine that's considered an ethnic minority, and it's one of the only Turkic descendancies that is highly discriminated against in Ukraine, and also attempted to be genocided. So there's a part of my family that, like, and our name on that side, like, I don't want to give away too much of my family's personal information, but, like, our name is one of the few names that traces back to a different ethnicity that's not, like, Austro-Hungarian Ukrainian, which is sort of the Ukraine that is being supported right now. And so, when on one side of my maternal side of my family, that group, and these were immigrants that came as settlers, to just like in Israel, to farm the land. And some of these people were fleeing persecution in Ukraine. And one of my great, like, grandparents or whatever, like, they were, like, 15, 16 when they came to Canada, they were fleeing. And so you have, like, there is that, and I think that that's also part of the problem, where I draw parallels to what I witnessed in Israel, because you have when Ukrainians, the first wave of Ukrainians that came to Canada to settle in the prairies, because there were, I think, 3 major waves before, the Russian invasion kind of immigration that's now happened and stuff. So there's different times of the history in Ukraine where people came here, But you do have these people, much like the Jewish people that lay claim to Palestine, that feel like they were fleeing persecution and fleeing all of these things. And listening to some of those people in Israel, I hear some of the same things that I hear from some of the people in the communities here. And the other thing that just really bugs me, like going into this history, just as a side note, and maybe we can talk about this more later too, I find it just so, it also boils my blood, the situation with Ukraine, because like my great grandfather was put into an internment camp in Canada, and people don't talk about that. But Canada, and there's a very angry Ukrainian population that still has not like had recognition for this. There was a period where Ukrainians were rounded up, all of these people were rounded up and put into internment camps across, like that were across the country, like at the time of World War I. And these people could not, if they tried to leave the camps, they were shot down. Like this was basically like, you know, these were concentration camps. And Canada says they don't use slavery, but they use the labor of they call it unpaid labor of these people that were kept in the camps. So these Ukrainians, and there were other people from Eastern Europe, but 85% of the camps were Ukrainians. And these people were the ones that built the national parks, that they forced them to do all this slave labor called unpaid labor with a gun to their heads in these internment camps where many people died. They were starving. Like there's a whole Holocaust that happened there that nobody talks about. So that's also part of the history that now has like manifested this victimhood, like, and it's legitimate victimhood. But that's why I'm also just fascinated by these histories that colonialism has done, because it's radicalized people generations later that have not, you know, that, or that then want a seat closer to the imperial table or whatever. So they're like, you know, so we have letters that my great grandfather wrote from this concentration camp. And so that's, you know, and that's enough, like, so this is Canada. And then, but on top of it, all of these people came in and were given this farmland for very like reasonable prices that they could afford, to become the people that would then make sure that Indigenous people couldn't return to the land, farm this land for empire, like do all of these things. So there's that, you know, part of Canada too. And these settlers were treated very differently and seen very differently than the Anglo and French imperial settlers that you see more in Ontario and Quebec. And for me, like, so I have, you know, my mother moved away from like where she was from, and she came to Montreal where she met my father. And that's, you know, where our family has been. And the experience of being a non-French Canadian also living in Quebec means that you're also ostracized, like, because Quebec has their own imperial, like, and Quebec contributes to this Indigenous erasure because they see themselves as victims of the Anglo Empire, and they see Quebec as like New France or whatever. They see that as the Indigenous land. They see it as their rightful land, and they completely ignore that any Indigenous people were there, that they were colonizers. So I grew up in that. And just watching it, because there was no opportunity for me to be accepted in this Canada that I grew up in. And, you know, and my parents were very hardworking people, and they became doctors, and they sent us to a really amazing school, one of the most prestigious schools in the country that all the politicians and Zionist CEOs' kids go to. So I grew up watching these kids, like, and meeting each other. And now I see them and they're all like becoming prime ministers or running the social media programs, or they own all the big corporations in Canada. And I just needed to escape Canada. So by the time that I was at the end of high school, I left, and then I only came back to Canada because of the pandemic. And so it's been like, I have this experience here, but it's also been a relearning, because my experience as a younger person was certainly more individual, and that I just felt like I needed to get out of this space, and I didn't understand the extent of what empire was. So I'm looking at it in a new lens in that way. But it's, you know, that there's so many it's just it's a very problematic country, and and I think the worst thing is that it's based on a lot of denialism, and I guess we'll talk about that, you know, as this goes on too. But I think denialism and this whole association with Britain comparing themselves to the US, which is across the board in Canada, these are all Canada very much starts history when it needs to, even if it's just from 2 months ago, it will restart history. Like it's become so collectively normalized to do things like that. So that there's a culture there that I think is really important to talk about also. But I'll stop there because I'm talking a lot.
Can I just quickly say that, and then I'd love to hear Renee and Jared too, is that this is, you know, what Sam has sort of laid out for us is not an aberration of settler colonialism. It's precisely what it is, because all this hierarchy of race and within and the sort of exaltation of whiteness in a very particular way, and a reproduction of European hierarchies of whiteness, and it's precisely how you coalesce and make a structure that always displaces indigeneity. That's the point, right? So you have the Ukrainian immigrants coming in and tending the land and making national parks, which Canada is very known for and very proud of. And it's just like, it always displaces the fact. And they're very proud. These immigrants are very proud. They're like, we built this nation. And it's just like, this is all fucking stolen land. And you're always being triangulated through that. Sunaida Thobani has a great book called Exalted Subjects around the making of race in Canada, specifically for this reason, because it's always about displacing indigeneity. And that doesn't mean there aren't complicated histories of immigrants and why immigrants become immigrants, but particularly in Canada, there's a way in which this gets reconfigured to completely hide seamlessly white supremacy, the ways in which promises to Indigenous people have been broken, the ways that they are incredibly hierarchical in there. So I think somebody in the chat was like, I don't get it. Like, she's Canadian, doesn't Canada respect that? There are so many hierarchies of citizenship in Canada, including more recent forms of that, of like even first generation people being limited to how you can actually get citizenship. You can't pass, even if you have citizenship. If you've passed it on one time, you can't pass it on a second time. You actually have to be born there. There's so many hierarchies, but all of them are precisely to displace indigeneity. And it's the construction of a white, you know, fantasy. This is the Disneyfication of it, of what Canada looks like, in, of course, in comparison to the United States. But I just wanted to kind of put a fine point on that.
No, and I just want to add something, like, just again, it's more just like a detail, like just to add to what you're saying, like, you know, again, like, that's why I do see it like a Disneyland, because there's so many problems in the Disneyland, but ultimately the Disneyland is there, like you said, on stolen land, and there is a whole group of people that are like the natural caretakers, the Indigenous caretakers of that land, that are not even included in this whole drama of the Disneyland and its hierarchies, and even like there's almost like this weird apartheid even within the white systems or in the settler colony in Canada, because that's another thing that like charter right, like people that are scholars of charter rights, we have something in our charter. I know I brought this up before. We have something in our charter called Section 33, which basically means that at the government's discretion, whether it's federal, provincial, or our head of state, King Charles, across the pond, they can annul without any reason, they can remove any of our civil rights. And I know that that's like no one's deluded that that's like everywhere in the West, but like it's actually in our legislation that is legal. And so all of our rights, like, you know, things like right to freedom of speech, right to protest, the only right that they can't touch is our right to vote. Everything else, they can just take it. We don't actually have those rights. So if we don't have the right to protest. If they change their mind, it's actually fully legal for them to revoke that right. And we've seen that now in Toronto, where they've made bubble zones where you're not allowed to protest and stuff. And so, but that being said, so there are none of these rights. And another thing, like, as like for myself, because I always felt so trapped in this space that I knew was like dangerous for me, but at the same time, it was my only citizenship. You know, you look at people that are of French or Anglo-Canadian descent, and they all have the right, like, to go and get their UK or France passport. They have that, like, if you are descended from that, if your family came from there, you can still get that passport. So that is the loophole, that there is a certain group of people that can still have civil rights in their respective countries, but you can't, like, so there, and other Canadians cannot have that these kind of policies were not set up. So there is a sort of a like, I mean, again, like it depends. I know that that's like a bit particular, and it depends on like legislation from different countries. And, you know, some people that have parents, if you were born in Canada, but your parents came from somewhere else, you can get a passport from there. But that is something that's also very interesting in Canada. And I guess charter rights or whatever, scholars that focus on these kind of civil rights, that it's only Canada and Israel that have this kind of legislation. At least that's what I read. And I don't know if I haven't like read everything in the world, and I'm not a lawyer, but that's apparently what certain charter scholars or whatever have said. So even within the settler system, there's a sort of mini apartheid or hierarchy of how human, like, actual legal rights are distributed. And that's a whole other situation with Indigenous people that literally have no rights. Like, they can create their own rights on the reservations, they can create their own legislation, and that's sort of been like how Canada has created, and I think all settler colonies do this, that they can create their own legislation on their land, and then Canadian law doesn't apply to them, so they have no protections when they're on settler land. And RCMP, and this is something that happens all the time, RCMP are going in, because RCMP are basically like the IOF.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yes. And I love, like, just as a fashion statement, but I know that this isn't the same thing, because a lot of Army people shopped at the same place in that time, that era. But RCMP uniforms are literally the same as SS uniforms. They just have different colors. But I know, like, the Russians also had these uniforms and stuff too, but that's like a little, like, aesthetic that I find ironic. But that's basically what the RCMP are there for, is the same reasons as the IOF, is to remove that's their job. That's all that they do is go after Indigenous people. And they operate in a way that if they commit a crime on the reservation, if they get off the reservation onto Canadian soil, then they didn't commit a crime. There's no law that holds them accountable for anything. So even though Canada loves to say that Indigenous people, that this was like a gift to them, that they can, you know, create their own legislation on their land, it's also a loophole for Canada. So there's all, yeah, I'll stop there too with the legislative stuff, but there's all kinds of really problematic things happening.
I mean, I feel like there's always problematic things happening, right? It's like there is literally no rest at all from the chaos. Like, it's just, it's absurd. There, I have so many questions, and I don't really know, like, I don't even know where to start, because I feel like it's so, for really the overall project of this, that Canada is so wildly overlooked as a settler colony. And I think your description of, you have to look at Canada the same way you look at Israel, and like that parallel pathway of like bringing Europeans in to displace the native Indigenous people, and then those people deciding that they're now Indigenous to the land, right? Like, which is so just that general premise of it, I feel like, is at the core of everything that comes after that. And if people could if people could really like internalize that knowledge and understand, like it's no different than any other settler colony. It's literally no different. They just have more space because they have less people. So I don't. Jared, do you have? I feel very overwhelmed by my questions, I think, right now. Do you have any? And Lara is always taking notes, so I'm sure there's something you can follow up on. But I think I need to get my thoughts together. I'm like overwhelmed by the absurdity of this whole notion of all the things that Canada is that people simply don't acknowledge, don't talk about, don't know, because they, like I said at the start, they've been able to hide in the shadow of US imperialism.
Well, I don't have anything meaningful, so I'll at least remind folks to like, share, subscribe, and do all the things to support the platform as we give Renee a quick mental break in a moment. And but I you know, in part the reason that I will just say, and then I'll invite anyone to continue on. But for a lot of how I was excited about approaching today was, as I said before, some of the mythology that's encouraged out of necessity and understandably related to the flight of escaping Africans from enslavement here. But in general, there is a broader mythology about the whiteness of Canadians, the Canadian niceness. I hear joked about all the time. We make fun, even the way we make fun of some of the accent is meant to give a softness to it. And then, of course, we never hear from the indigenous experiences or the actual folks who suffered the settler colonization most directly. And we don't hear, as I said earlier, the experience of Black folks going forward. So that's why, once they get there, it's like the movie just ends and everybody, it's almost like, I don't know, I laugh at it. When the TV series Roots ends, they're literally riding off into the sunset on a wagon, like everything from 1860 on is good. And I know it's still here in the US, but it's just like that I was like, well, everything's fine now, riding off to the sunset on our wagon, all good, everything forward is great. But one of the reasons why I changed the title of the show today, referencing even the film and the pun of bacon and pig and et cetera and so forth. But Canadian Bacon, was a film that my generation grew up on, was yet another sort of, it was meant to be a comedic play on not only the stereotypes of the Cold War and what we think we know about it, but it's again meant to undermine the second half of the title, that is an all forgotten colony and police state. So yeah, I again, I don't have, yeah, Samantha, you're saying something you about hiding. You want to say something about hiding? Yeah.
I would just say that.
Or Lara, I'm sorry. Yeah, my bad.
Lara. Yeah, no. I just to Renee's thing about the hiding, I'll just make a quick comment. I don't think Canada is hiding. I think it was hidden. I think it was hidden, just like Israel was hidden for a very long time, because they were both similar projects for empire, and they needed to operate like with that function. And like, I know when I lived in Europe, that's what everyone, I think I brought this up before, but that's also what, like European, like people that I talk to, just people that watch the regular news or whatever, like nothing, not analysts or anything, but they'd always just say, oh, we never hear about Canada unless it's NATO. And I think, I think that in the same way that it was very purposeful to hide Israel, like, because we knew about Israel, but we know about Israel? Like, did the average person really, like, it was just kind of this vague thing over there, and Canada's this vague thing over here. And I think for similar purposes. So that was all I was going to just say.
And I would say that I have something to say about the police state, Jared, because those were the notes that actually I was taking, and then the ways that the construction of it. But to follow on that, I think we see this erasure, this purposeful erasure of Canada. And I don't mean it like, oh, poor Canada, they're being erased. It's purposeful in terms of how it's done, even in terms of scholars. Like, this is the hegemony of academia. There are incredible Indigenous scholars in Canada, from Canada, and I would say, I'm, even me, I'm just like, they're not from Canada. They're indigenous to the nation that is now known as Canada, right? But just like off the top of my head, like Leanne Simpson, Audra Simpson, Glenn Coulthard, somebody mentioned Robin Maynard, an incredible Black scholar in Canada. There are so many incredible scholars.
Gabriel.
Yeah, who have been thinking through this stuff. And like, oftentimes the joke is like, if you are in academia in Canada, like people in the United States just don't even think about you, right? And I think there's something to be said about the infrastructure of the separation of these things, even though they're part of the same infrastructure of empire and settler colony making. And this is the part of coming in, is that, yes, the settler state of Canada exists in the shadow of the most cruel empire in the world. And it's very easy to be like, whoa, the United States fucking sucks. But I want to also say that the construction is bi-directional, because it's liberals in the settler colony of the United States that also use the myth of Canada being nicer to mobilize, like that's their progressive position, right? We hate the United States, let's flee to Canada. Like their settler expansionism is on the one hand unbridled because borders don't exist to them. They can just fucking go wherever they want. But on the other hand, think about the confession they're making, is that, oh, we have this thing, this other settler colony that actually still feels very familiar to me. That's a confession also internally about like, you all know what settlers in the United States are like. They're not about going to places where they feel uncomfortable or that they have to actually change anything. But think about the number of academics, like that Yale academic who writes about fascism, who got up and decided to go to the University of Toronto and was just like, oh, I'm fleeing fascism from the United States, so I'm going to Canada. For me, we have to look at that too, about the construction and the myth making around Canada that emanates also from the United States, which is part of the surveillance in the police state, the fetishization of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Propaganda is our main, like,
holy
if
shit,
produce their own shows, it's only propaganda. We even have Victorian era propaganda, like everything. Yeah.
But it's also not just, that's my point. It's like, yes, of course, Canada is in the business of propagandizing how great they are. And that's why people were surprised when you come out with like Canada First now. And I'm like, how is this surprising to you just because it's mobilized through the fascism of Trump? Canada First has always been there. Massive truck anti-trans rallies, by the way, were there. Anti-COVID vaccine shit was there. This has been around. Wet'suwet'en, Indigenous people, land protectors being brutalized. This is all happening at the same fucking time. This is not new, but that's what I mean about the bidirectionality of the construction of this. So the fetishization of the RCMP as like some big cuddly teddy bears comes from the United States too. Because there's something about the United States when people, liberals, I'm talking about liberals now, are unable to metabolize the constitutive violence that constructs what it is to be a settler colony. Their displacement is it's not about, defunding and dismantling police forces. It's about where are there nicer police forces? And their thing is like, oh, look at these cuddly bears that dress in red and have a little fucking hat and sit on horses, and they're so nice, and I go take pictures of them. Like, the RCMP is fucking vicious. They are vicious, vicious cops. It's because they're cops that they're vicious. And like Samantha was saying about like existing there to control, demonize, and weaponize this state violence against Indigenous people, right? Again, when I was talking about Wet'suwet'en, you watch the RCMP brutalized with full force. There is nothing different than what the settler colonial, violence machine in the United States is versus that. And many ways, but people are shocked when they watch it. And that's what I think I want people to sort of interrogate, is that the shock that we watch when we watch RCMP engage in violence. Or, by the way, there's an entire, tracking service for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, because Indigenous women and girls get disappeared and murdered every fucking day in Canada. Every day. This is not an exaggeration, across the settler colony. And so like, that's what I mean. It's like the shock that we might feel when we're like, oh shit, RCMP is, you know, actually brutal, or I can't believe Indigenous women and girls are still being disappeared to the rate that they are. That shock is an affective implant that comes from our myth making, that is a bidirectional myth making that displaces the fact that Canada is a white supremacist settler colony, right? And I think that repetition is really important because the point is to make that displacement happen. I just want to tell a story quickly that sort of shows this liberal thing. So I was presenting at a panel at a conference once, and actually I was in the audience of this one at a conference I was presenting at, and they were presenting about reproductive rights and like how reproductive rights are under attack in the context of the settler colony of the United States. And it was a great panel. I mean, they were making great interventions. And then one by one, people from the audience and from the panel kept reaching to Canada as a place of like, but look what they have, and like healthcare or whatever the thing is. And so at one point I had to make an intervention. I put my hand up and I was just like, I completely understand what it's like to live under the crush of US imperialism and violence. And also, can we sort of look at, remember, this is psychology, this is a kind of psychoanalytic conference. So I was like, can we look at what's being mobilized every time and what's being displaced when we reach to Canada? Our Indigenous sisters are like being disappeared constantly, and whose reproductive rights, all the things that you might say. So people were like, oh yeah, some people were disturbed because they hate killjoys and they hate being disrupted from their little liberal, you know, bubbles. Then when it was done and I was leaving, this senior analyst who's known to be one of the most liberal people, right? And like talks about race, she's white, writes about race and is like so liberal and so progressive, comes up to me and says, if you're not happy with your Canadian citizenship, I'm happy to take it off your hands. Right? And just fucking, and I was just like, oh my God, she literally did, you fucking ungrateful little immigrant, right? How dare you? And if you're not happy with it, I'm happy to, I mean, everything about that was racist, but it just shows you that liberals always have to be involved in this myth making. It is not just the state project. It's about the conscription of people to make this myth on both ends of it, of both to like have a valve of innocence for settler colonies because they see themselves in that. It's an identificatory process, right? They see themselves in the settler colony of Canada, but then can be like, oh, it's a nicer version of that. But also because fundamentally they are racist white supremacists. And we have to keep that in mind about the dynamic that makes it such that Canada can hide.
And I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because people say the same thing about living in the US, right? Like, if you don't like it, then, you know, you can go somewhere else. And so, you know, I'm equally fascinated by that conversation because, you know.
And I'll go, just to be clear, like in the right circumstance, set it up correctly. You know, I'm saying, you know, put some standards, conditions on it, you know, and I'm out. So just to be clear.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I thought that in Canada my whole life, even as a child, because like I started noticing, like I started talking about how it's exactly the same as Israel, and everybody, that was the response I would get from a lot of people and stuff.
And, you know, and it brings the question, like, because we talk about this a lot, like, even so, okay, so I go, right? Like, the US is still going to be an imperial project that's destroying other places, right? So I could go somewhere and then the US could come right behind me and like destroy the place where I'm at, right? And so there's also this question of like, instead of you telling me like, well, if you don't like it, go somewhere else, how about you work with me so that multiple people can live here and like it? right?
Nah. We're not doing that. No, Renee. But I would, if we could sky full of elephants this just for a moment, sort of, I would like to theorize what it would be like for them if in fact everyone did leave. Everyone they want out did leave. Like, I kind of want to see what that look. I want to see them have to, like we've already seen the collapse in this country. They're like, I'm supposed to go pick them strawberries. I'm supposed to go bag them groceries. Nuh-uh. So like, I want to see all of that. I want to see the and then what? And I want to see everything from what the sports leagues look like, what their entertainment looks like, what their class conditions look like. Do you really want that? I'd like who's like, I kind of would want to see like what it would look like if we could do like a what's that show? Pluribus? Is that the name of the show? What's that show? Whatever it is, like let's play with the, like, I would want to just see what it would be like. Like, maybe we could, sci-fi that one up real quick. And anyway, but I also like Fannie Lou Hamer's response. I'll leave when you leave.
There we go.
So
there we go. The land's not either of ours anyway. So like,
yeah, I'll leave when you leave. We can all leave together.
We can all go.
I think it's like all those movies that we've been criticizing, though, these fantasy worlds where everyone just happens to have a good life. Like, you never see who's like taking out, like, who's clearing the garbage off the street, who's doing this. Like, I think
so. I'm sorry to jump back in, but part of what I'm getting at is that so just quickly, I just saw again this thing where this accidental beautiful moment where the social media dude I Show Speed shows up in Botswana and he tries to buy a diamond, and the dude tells him, you can't. We only are allowed to sell to De Beers and to the National Diamond Company. That's it. And there's this and then he tells him this De Beers was set up by Cecil Rhodes. What that reminded me of course, is who Cecil Rhodes was and what was his goal, and what in fact did he say as part of why he thought it was important for white people to conquer the entire globe. And he started with the fact that the cities of London are overcrowded and we need to get rid of our pores and have them go spread out and settle other parts of the world for white people's ability to survive. So part of what, despite the geographical difference in the United States being larger than England, this, that, and the third in the room and they would still run into this problem of, even when it's just whites, there are these class interests and hostilities and all this other kind of stuff that would obviously be likely more intensified. And then they'd be saying the same thing. We need to import some people in here to create some buffer, like to create some confusion and distract and have them be hostile to these groups. So anyway, I'm sorry, but yeah, I'll go when you go.
And I like the folks who are like, fuck no, I'm not like if Indigenous folks let me stay, there's folks in the chat that are just like, fuck this shit. And it's like, Indigenous people let me stay. But I think that's part of it, right? Is like, who are the shepherds of the land? When we say land back, what does that actually mean? That's not a symbolic. I'm always interested by the white fantasy of what they think is going to happen to them, which again is a confession of what they've fucking done. They know their violence, right? It's never that. And I think I just want to say that there is a incredible depth and seriousness and thoughtfulness about the ways in which Indigenous scholars engage this question, and particularly in the context of the settler colony of Canada, where they do distinguish between settlers and immigrants, right? Or people who were brought against their will to Turtle Island. This is not a question about like, what does it mean when enslaved folks are, brought here against their will? There is a differentiation between that. And I think it's about resource extraction, coercion, and domination. And that's why I think you know, especially again, I've seen some of the greatest thinking around this in the context of Canada, because Canada has also pushed this multicultural existence language like nothing else, right? It's like, we are a melting and come on in. And part of it is the expansiveness. Part of it is that, what is it, like 30 million people in the, or I like always,
or 35,
right.
and 89%
Okay.
of that is Euro descended.
Right. And, but that's why there are all these like particular channels of immigration. They're like professional classes you can come in and have. Now, a lot of that has changed. And Carney's actually being a hard ass around immigration too, even though people were like, oh, he's the liberal, he's going to change it. But it's not surprising that it's around labor. It's around brain drain from the global south. It's around professional classes like nursing and doctors and engineers. And that's when you see the global south coming. But what I was saying prior to this was, even those people who get through those channels. And again, the language of legality is actually really important here, because of course it ties into like who's legal on stolen land. That's not just a slogan. That's real, about all these channels of the ways in which, you know, immigration law, and there's a whole field about that, by the way, and I'm not of that. I'm not a scholar of that. But the way it's articulated and always again positioned against Indigenous folks and their rights, and not just treaty rights, just their rights as the inhabitants of that land, the people whose land it belongs to. But even the channels that comes through, this is what I was alluding to earlier, the ways in which civilizational discourse is baked into that, right? So coming in as like a somebody who's going to become a professional, go into a professional class, meaning like a nurse, for example. This is a real example. And they'll bring you in, and there's this like 3 to 6 month, right, boot camp of every day going into classes to teach you how to be civilized. And this is from like folks who are, let's say, from the Arab world. I'm going to use this example. Somebody from the Arab world who invented soap, and like cleanliness is a fucking big thing, being taught in a classroom how to actually wash your hands properly as part of the process to become a real Canadian. And this person expressing to me how undignified and humiliating it was. And this, I'm talking about a couple years ago. This is not like 50, 60, 80 years ago, which it wasn't okay then, but like sometimes that feels like, oh, this was a long ago thing, where one by one, everybody who's from the global south is being made to line up and walk up to a sink, which is set up in a classroom, folks. There's a sink in a classroom with soap to be watched and graded on whether or not they know how to remain cleanly, right? This is how baked in this is. So even when we're talking about these immigration things and the chances that people get, and wow, it's so much better than the United States, it's like, fuck that shit. This is what's on the other side of that. And then there's this way in which also immigrants are meant to have to feel grateful for these opportunities because of the destabilization that's happened in their countries by empire and by Canada joining in. Somebody was putting about Haiti. Remember the ways in which Canada has consistently sided with empire, whether that's the British Empire or American Empire. And that was what Carney's fucking speech was about, when he was just like, for so long, we stayed silent and got the best of America's plunder. That is the truest thing he could ever fucking say, because it was always the benefit of them. That's what I mean about also constructing the United States as the cruelest empire. It was to the benefit of settler colonies that aren't the United States, to let them do the most cruel outward things, but also completely participate in that, right? Canada participated in Afghanistan. There are Canadian fucking forces that are plundering Palestine. Canadians have been involved in every single imperial project, and they get to fucking hide. You know, they were in Iraq, they were in Afghanistan, they were in all these sorts of things. So it's always, that's why I keep coming back to this. Like, we have to divest from the myth making itself and the seductions we have in that too. To this day, there is nothing new about this, and none of it has gone away. In fact, I think it's actually gotten worse.
Yeah, I would say it's probably gotten worse.
So, Sam, there's still a lot, but we've managed to, like, you know, like, weave in a lot of the different things that were on the list. But as we're, like, you know, partway into the second half of the show, I'm wondering, is there something on the list of topics that, like, as you look at that list, you're like, this is the thing that I think most people really don't understand about Canada, where we can start from? I mean, there's a lot, but I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we shape the next part of the conversation? So
yeah, I mean, I guess there's, like, the current contemporary lived realities, and then there's the whole, like, I think that the crucial thing is everything that Lara said, though. This, like, the attack on Indigenous people for land theft and how this land is being used. Like, this is something that has been, you know, like even in Canada, I can just say, since I came back here at the start, like, I had a funny story that I got trapped here, and, like, I had to come back from the UK to renew my passport in Canada in February, like, 2020, and then it, like, lockdown happened like a few weeks later. But, you know, having grown up in the settler sphere and then seeing, like I bring up the fact that we are 89% white, or identified with white, is sort of what our demographics are. That's a big problem, because it contributes to the denialism, and we have enough, like, social comforts and stuff like that here that, you know, people don't talk about things. And in terms of even the situation with all these Indigenous communities across the country, that just wasn't even in the discourse. Like, it took the international community reporting about the residential schools for a lot of Canadians to hear about that for the first time. Like, never even knew that existed. And I'm not exaggerating with that. That's why it's just so much like Israel. There is a bubble around the settler population. And it's very, like, and I just remember being in school before I left Canada, you know, for like my studies and for my career. And I was at this lecture on the climate with David Suzuki, who's sort of a famous Canadian environmentalist. And I remember that some Indigenous people came into the auditorium and they started asking questions about that. I'd never heard somebody talking about that before in all my education. And the response was I remember this, it was very violent. People, like, ushered these people out very quickly. And the buzz in the room was that people were like, why do they have to this is not the place to talk about those things. Why did they have to disrupt the lecture? Like, that's Canada. Like, I feel like that stuck with me, because that's really the kind of bubble, you know, that Canada lives in. So I mean, the harm, the settler colonial project and ongoing Indigenous genocide is just I think one of the most obfuscated things, both internally and outside. I think that all the other issues that sometimes get talked about are often, that can, unfortunately, sometimes instead of being put in the context that Lara put everything, they get put in a context of contributing to the Indigenous erasure. Like, these are, you know, and you see that in the States, like, these are not American values, these are not Canadian values, or that it starts from like the way that, like, as if this is a country that's always been here, and that this is our, you know, so there is that weird thing, and that weird, like, there's a very just problematic, it's a very liberal even like we have neoconservatives and we have neoliberals in this country, but there's all this kind of there is a liberalism that's like across the board that is really problematic. So I just feel like that's like, even Al Jazeera did this 6-part series on Indigenous, like violations of Indigenous rights. What's like, Canada has never, like mainstream media has never covered Indigenous people in this way. And even some, like there are other independent media sources like The Breach, and they do have some Indigenous reporters, but unless you're actually going to Indigenous websites and communities, you're not even getting that kind of information. Al Jazeera probably did a better job than anything here. So that would be the main thing that I would just really want people to understand, that Indigenous life in Canada is like what we're witnessing in the West Bank. That is how they live. Like they live like what we're seeing in the West Bank, and that's ongoing. That's every day. When those residential graves were discovered, there's a Truth and Reconciliation Committee that's been established for like a couple decades. And prior to that, there was this like Royal Commission, Aboriginal Committee to sort of fight for Indigenous rights. And they're just in this perpetual state of constantly doing whatever Canada says is legally required for them to fight for things. And they were advocating for a Truth and Reconciliation Day as one of these 90 plus reconciliation items that they were requesting from Canada. And Canada denied it for 15 years. And as soon as the international media posted that there were these residential graves, Canada approved Truth and Reconciliation Day within 2 weeks after 15 years of denying it. So everything Canada does is just for posturing. And then even when that was approved, Justin Trudeau didn't show up to the first official Truth and Reconciliation Day that was, I think, at Kamloops, or at the gravesite that was discovered. And he didn't even show up because he said he was busy in Ottawa, and he was actually on an $18 million vacation on a private island off of Vancouver with taxpayer money. So he's just a young version of Trump. Justin Trudeau is like, they have the same kind of narcissism. But those are the things, sorry, I'm rambling a lot, but that would be like the most crucial thing. And then, and in the way that the society is operating now, I mean, I don't even know where to start. Like there's a really big problem of young Black boy trafficking that's happening in Ontario that is not being recognized by any official authorities. There's a woman that I watched a report. There's this one woman, and now I'm forgetting her name. I wrote her name down. She took it upon herself to go and investigate this, and she found 6 hotspot cities in Ontario along the US border where these boys are being trafficked. And this is like, and you know, I was at a funeral service a couple of weeks ago, and even in the church, I just saw that there was like from 6 years ago a missing Black boy that was like, you know, posted up on the church, but especially in Ontario. But I don't want to say that that's like unique to Ontario, but there is some kind of trafficking that's going on, and then these boys are turning up dead. And she's found out that like there is there's, you know, nobody's cooperating in investigating this. So this is just happening. And a lot of it, that what she suspects is that these crimes are tied to using these boys to instigate violence in other communities, to further racism and all, like, and who knows what else. But there's something very weird happening that seems to be organized. So, and that's like, that is a thing. Like on social media, you will see people posting like, if anyone's seen this boy, it's always Black boys. So that's, I don't know, like that's another thing. We have a Nazi, like they're like, like I don't even know where to start with the Nazism, because it wasn't like a fluke thing in like our Minister of Finance or whoever it was, or what's her name, Chrystia Freeland, who wanted to honor that SS officer. She descends from a Nazi family and she's very proud of her family. Canada just erected a $1.5 million monument in Ottawa called The Victims of Communism. And most of the names on it, people started recognizing, were all decorated SS officers. So now
they had to erase the names.
Like scrubbing the names off.
That is so Canada. That's so good. So the monument has like erased names.
Yes. So there is a serious like official, like, and this is all the way tied into the governments. These are all aligned people. And that's tied in with Zionism in Canada as well. And I like, so I don't even know, like, yeah, there's just so much. Like Canada also, like for all its, you know, there are monuments across the country that are Stars of David intertwined with the Canadian maple leaf. All of our prime ministers take these pledges of allegiance to Israel. You know, they openly say that they're Zionists. I know like Biden did that too, but like all of our prime ministers are probably people may have seen Justin Trudeau's farewell speech where he openly said that he's a Zionist, he's proud to be a Zionist, and he called on Canadians to be proud of being Zionists and not only to speak out against people that criticize Zionists, but to take action against them. This was our prime minister. Carney also openly declares himself a Zionist. Harper is a Zionist. And Canada always sells itself. Like, this is why I'm just like, we're a factory. And I started seeing this in my industry, in the video game industry, this kind of relationship with military. And then I started looking into it more. And, you know, and there's all the mining that Canada does. And that's Canada's colonialism, because they're doing extractive mining around the world. They're they raise communities to the ground. Like, they violently occupy spaces around the world. Canada has not done a peacekeeping mission in over 3 decades. So all of these peacekeeping missions are to basically kill Indigenous people, force them off of their space so that these Canadian mining companies can come in. And Canada owns like 50+% of the world's like mining companies. So that's another thing. But all of these things are tied into this whole imperial thing. And Canada, you know, and it's that's why I just find, like, you know, I say this history about Ukrainians, because Canada also, and the BBC did a documentary on this or something, Canada, of all the Western nations, refused the most Jewish people that were fleeing Nazi Germany. They refused them, and there are documented, like, that there actually are, you know, there was like a ship of like 900 Jewish people trying to get safety in Canada. Canada turned them away. And I think over 30% of those people that were on that boat were documented as having been killed in Nazi Germany. And Canada, like, no, and then, you know, Justin Trudeau, just like when this all came out, he's like, oh, I'm sorry.
But accepted Nazis and their families.
But accepted Nazis and their families, yeah, and Zionists. If you were a wealthy Zionist Jew, you could come to Canada. So we have this relationship with Nazis and Zionists that has always, you know, been here, but Jewish people that were not Zionists were refused and actually documented as having been killed because of that refusal. And so, like, this is Canada. Like, that's I guess, like, so I don't know. And there's so much to go on with that. And like, Lester Pearson was one of the biggest lobbyists at the UN to establish the state of Israel. Like, that was very important. So Canada has had a relationship with them. People should look up Operation Proteus, which is the RCMP's program that they have always been training in the West Bank with Israeli soldiers since who knows when. The whole chief of police force has like an intimate relationship, like, across Canada, because there's a chief of police website that's like a whole group of people, and then I don't know if the police system runs the same way as in the US, but it's the same thing. I know that's the same for Americans and basically everywhere in Europe. They're all training in Israel. But since the inception, before, I think, even America's relationship, because of the British establishment with Israel, and then now Canada's sort of economic relationship, both with Britain and with America, because it's always been a factory where they sell all this Indigenous land to outside corporations to extract things, test their weapons. We manufacture the majority of F-35 parts that we then ship to the US. The mining, like, all of it, we heavily fund STEM. If you're an engineer in Canada, that's like considered the only serious job to have. And that's all part, you know, of this.
Can I also add that Canada, I think it was don't quote me on this, one of the major prestigious universities in Canada was also the site where a lot of the psychological operations
McGill
experiments.
McGill.
Okay,
Ultra,
I was like,
Ultra program.
Yes, was in McGill.
I have to say this because there's the Mohawk mothers, the Ganasage mothers this is hard for me to talk about because I think of when Biden was building that pier, and they were taking all of the rubble with the bones of children and all of these people to build this pier. And I know that this is something that colonizers just do, but McGill University right now is expanding and renovating, and the Mohawk mothers are trying to halt this because there is a site of they have found shoes, children's shoes, bones, body parts are across the McGill site that they are now expanding. These were all children, Indigenous children that were tested on in McGill at their MK Ultra. That's here in Montreal. Like, that's the thing. Montreal is like the hotbed of where all of this, like, and the majority of Zionists were all here in Montreal. And then because of the Quebec, there's the whole thing about Quebec wanting to separate and all this stuff. And when that happened, there was a big referendum in the 90s. When that happened, a lot of the business people, because of instability, moved to Toronto. And that's where Toronto suddenly exploded into a big city. But prior to that, Montreal was like the center of everything. So,
and MK Ultra is the one that's the most known. I think University of Toronto also had a secret site in which a psychologist from the United States also went to train. Psychologists from the Zionist entity also went to train. They were experimenting on Black folks. They were experimenting on Indigenous people. Like, MK Ultra is the most well known. Yes. But this has been a long-standing project. And again, the fact that it can like exist or hide in Canada is not it's not by chance.
And I would honestly, because it's happening now, like, I would really encourage people to look up the Mohawk mothers. When we had our Truth and Reconciliation Day, which was like sort of colloquially known as Orange Shirt Day because Canada wouldn't recognize it. So Indigenous community, like, there's a whole story with an orange shirt, and they called it Orange Shirt Day to recognize these children. But this is just an example of how Canada is constantly co-opting these narratives. And I know this is just a liberal thing. Like, Lara, I know you have the analysis of this, but like, this year on Truth and Reconciliation Day, the Mohawk mothers did like a gathering at McGill to educate and inform about this while the construction is going on right next to us, while they're digging up and there's body parts being dug up. And McGill is not halting this. They're holding this gathering that maybe 20 of us were at. And at the same time, most of other settler Canadians were going to the museum to go and see like Indigenous like exhibitions for Truth and Reconciliation Day, or there was like an opera singer like doing a show at a thing for Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so everyone's going to these events, and there's like 15 or 20 people actually like with the Mohawk people that are the rightful caretakers of the land, and supporting and listening to what they're trying to say. And I just these, like, it's so hard in Canada for people to break through these kind of dominant narratives. So if people can look them up and support them and share what's happening, because it's actually happening now, and they're trying to get this construction to stop. It's really horrible. Like, I don't even, it's just, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's similar to UPenn still having the bones from the Move children, right? Like, like
they don't care.
They don't care. Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, and it's you just see it everywhere. But that's the thing, is like, I just see Canada as Israel, but maybe a century along. And that when Israel's killed every single one of us and there's nobody left, then they're going to be like, oh, look at us. We're such a, like,
that won't happen, Sam.
Right.
That won't happen. Palestinians aren't going anywhere, just like Indigenous folks of Turtle Island are going nowhere. That's not going to fucking happen. It's not going to happen.
No, and you're right. And like, and I think like that's been one of the things that I'm so grateful for, even though like I was horrified to get stuck back in Canada, to be able to now be here and see a little bit past the settler bubble that I was, kind of raised in, and to be able to connect with these communities and these thinkers. And Ellen Gabriel Gatzesaguas, she's like, if people get to look her up, and she wrote this amazing book called When the Pine Needles Fall, and I think Red Nation did some interviews with her too. But she's just, I don't even have words to describe her. She's amazing also. So I hope people can look.
I did drop the link to the Mohawk Mothers in the chat. I looked it up and dropped it in the chat so folks can follow up and check that information out. I'll be keeping that tab open so I can look at it later. And so there's just so much. It literally sometimes it just feels like swimming upstream. And Lara, I'm really glad that you jumped in and said, hell no. Like, look, like this is not the future does not exist without Palestinians keeping the fight going, just like the indigenous folks on Turtle Island have kept the fight going, just like the indigenous people. And so, like, when I think about all this evidence that people who have the rightful stake to their land never actually let it go, right? Like, there's that the Maori woman who won the seat in council, and they tried to pass something, and she got up and she ripped it, and they went into the haka, like you look at, and that was last year, right? Yeah, so like amazing. So you see these things, and it's hundreds, I mean centuries of DNA flowing through these people in all parts of the world who remain connected to their lands and are not ever going to say like, okay, we're going to give this up, right? Like, I follow Basan with probably an unhealthy level of interest, right? Simply because I always want to hear her say like, it's Basan and I'm still alive, right? Like, that's like, it's like, okay, good. Now what? Like, tell me what's happening now, right? And so I feel like, and I've said this to you so many, like, I'm not living here as a Black person in the belly of this particular beast, right? And Lara checked me one time because I was like my family didn't, like, we just did, like, that was not my experience. And she was like, women, like, think about your experience though, right? Like, don't forget of the very unique experience of being a Black person in this particular belly of the beast, right? And my mother and I talk all the time about like the strength that's built into the DNA, right? When you are of an indigenous people's ancestry, like no matter how many oceans they carried Black people across, there's still like an innate part of us that's like fuck you. Like, I'm still here, and fuck you, right? And fuck you again for whatever thing you think you have over me, right? Because of the amount of melanin I carry, right? And so I'm especially grateful for all of the insight that you both brought today, just because we have to start making these connections between all of these imperialist projects so that people, I want people to understand how connected it all is, right? How every time you look at something that is happening somewhere, if you follow the money and the trail of blood that brings you to that place, it always begins from the same imperialist structure, right? We are all we're all fighting the same people, right? Like, in the end, we're literally all fighting the same people. And I want desperately for more people to understand that very like that very core thing, right? Like imperialism is imperialism because it's the same people that are fighting to keep it what it is. And so these conversations, I feel like, are so like, they're so important to make those bridges, like to create those threads so people can understand how truly woven it is all together. And you know, we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I have like a sharp cutoff because we're actually going up to Syracuse. And so, but I want to make sure that we leave room, one, because the next email you're both getting is, okay, when's part 2? Because we're going to be at like part 20 by the time like we finish, if we ever finish the conversation, right? But also I want to leave room to make sure that if there's anything in particular today, given what we've covered, right? And Sam, you and me, Lara, maybe the next time the three of us are on, we can go through Sam's list and try and pick out like, okay, we got these covered. Like, which one should be next? And, you know, and
I'll send
like,
you my files.
so we can, you know, is there anything in particular that, sorry. Ode to John Trudeau wants to know, is Dr. Ball okay? Just so you all know, and this is after 2 years of doing this now, Jared gets like this when like he's just taking it all in. So I've learned not to worry about Jared.
How I hope I've not conveyed a sense of unease other than with what some of what we have to confront on this show. But I'm fine, thank you. I'm happy to sit quietly.
But is there anything either of you, and Lara, we can start with you. Is there anything in particular like, oh, before we finish, let me make sure I get this thought in, and then Sam, you can go.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think, Jared, we just love your mind. So people want to hear what you're thinking. I know I do. I'll speak for myself. Thanks for that, Renee. And I think, you know, what you shared about like when I was just like, sis, what the fuck are you talking about? Right. In the context of our conversation, that's not just a statement because we're comrades and friends and I love you. And it's like, it's because settler colonialism, and I think this is the mechanics of it. And I'm obsessed with mechanics of like, what are the how does this logic break down such that we can disavow that we're on stolen land, that Canada can be constructed in this way? Like, I'm really interested in the mechanics of it. And I think this is part of it, is that like when, and I understand, Sam, where your fear comes from about eliminating all Palestinians. And because I think we see the ferocity of the machine and the violence and who backs it. And I think that's a logical step. And I think if we're looking at the mechanics of settler colonialism, not just as a theory, but as a structure that like makes itself inside of us, part of the point is to ensure settler futures always. That the logics of settler colonialism is not just about taking land and theft and resource extraction, even though that is it. It's about making sure that our minds can't imagine a future without settler colonialism and settlers, and that settlers will always be in this position. And that's why I say, not only do I truly believe that resistance, whether in Turtle Island or Palestine or Lebanon or Yemen or Haiti or Venezuela or Cuba, wherever, will continue, right? Because it has, and I think we owe it to the people to respect the people on the ground who are resisting the boot of empire and settler colonialism every single day, even if those actions are not immediately available for us to see. You know, wherever there's oppression by power, there are people who are resisting it. There are people who know their truth. There are people who know their ancestry. There are people who know that it's their land, right? But also because part of the point is for us to write that history before it happens, because settlers don't care about anything except making sure they live in the future, that they will survive on the backs of everybody else dying, right? And I think that's why I say it's not going to fucking happen, because it hasn't happened. That doesn't mean we don't take stock of the violence that has happened or the people we have lost along the way. But they're lost along the way in an eliminatory logic that has not won. We persist. And that's why, Renee, back to your questions, when you say, I haven't had that experience, and I remind you about you're a fucking Black person in the United States, there's no way you haven't had that experience, because it's the same ethnic cleansing project, right? And that can happen a multitude of ways, whether it's through assimilation or, being brought in to be soldiers of empire, but not having the benefits of white supremacy. All the ways in which it happens, that's the logic. It's to make sure that it's these structures of power that persist and not us. And I'm not here for it. It's like, we're going to fucking go on. There's no way these things are not going to. And if nothing else, we're going to continue to give them a hard fucking time. Like, you don't get to do this shit. Just like we're seeing folks show up in the street against ICE raids. That doesn't mean that people aren't being kidnapped or being murdered, but it means you're not going to fucking do it and not get a fight in response to it. Or to think that somehow this is the only version of the world that exists, right? Psychologically, that is our armor against the ways that these things come to live inside of us to make any possibility, become an impossibility. I don't believe in impossibilities. That's why they fight harder. That's why they become more cruel, So that's my parting words, folks.
Your turn, Sam.
No, this is why I just have to say, this is why you're so amazing, Lara. Because it's funny, because as soon as you said that, I was thinking of all of the times that I watch you and you're like, the mind is a contested space. And I'm like, yes, you can't let it come in. So I love you for that. No, and you're right. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for being you. I guess, I just really appreciate, I just want to say, like, I just appreciate this space too. And, for all those reasons, because this is what, just like what you were saying, Lara, like, this is what it does. It isolates us. And I have to say that, it's been the first time in my life that I've been able to connect with, just because of the nature of like how colonialism manifested in my situation. It was very isolating and there wasn't community. So it is really wonderful to see that community and to be in community with the rest of the world. Like it's a different, I because we brought her up, Gatsisagwas, like Ellen Gabriel, she's always saying like, I think I take so much inspiration from her here, because she's always talking about like the world as like all of the children are our children. Like we're all in this. She doesn't divide the space as territory that someone owns. It's just the world. And she's fighting for faces not yet born is her words. And I find that really inspiring too. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful for all of you, because this has just been a really, and the chat and everyone, it's just been wonderful to be, doing this work together.
Thank you. Jared, should we go through, and you're both welcome to stay, but we probably should go through these super chats and new members and all these things before we end. And then while I'm gonna let Jared do that, you two drop off if you want. Just love you both, and I'll be in our little chat to set up our next little intimate Zooms that we do, which I love to pieces. And then while Jared is going through the starred things, because I always let him do that, I'm going to find that link for Sunday's Zoom with Brian Quoba, with the National Black Caucus of the Green Party, so that I can make sure that I share that link.
So no, Lara and Samantha, thank you very much. It's been great. And I'm now catching up, Lara, to some of your work, and I've pre-ordered your forthcoming book. So we have to do all of that too at some point.
And Jared late. I've been pre-ordered that bad boy.
Yeah.
I'm late to everything.
The link was released.
To the work with your I'm late to everything.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you.
But I'm gonna get there. I mean, and I started reading, oh man, the Psychoanalysis Under Occupation. And again, so look, we all of that. And definitely everybody check out Psychic Militancy and stay tuned for Samantha's next appearances here and in these spaces as well. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
To both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Folks.
Take care. And folks in the Undefeated chat, thank you very much as well. Salute to Gemini Dam. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Gemini Dam, new member. Welcome. Big Dumb Animal 55, thanks for the super sticker. Drums of Liberation, just showing love. Thank you very much. Lara, my parents stayed longer, but they went back too eventually. And Canada is Israel. Wanted to make sure we highlight that point that Samantha is raising up. This is a very, very good rebranding. Sean M. Parker, thank you very much. IUS had a Canadian friend identified as Anglophone. Proudly, I'd add, cared to comment on what the whole Anglo-Franco colonizer identity is about. So part two is
we'll have to save that question for the next time.
Although some of that did come up today, but we can definitely drill down on that. Cynical, we know of one of your scholars, Jordan Peterson. But Canada seems to have tried to get rid of him. So they try to And then lastly, support Red Nation. Lady Alex M is exactly right. Support Red Nation. And so thanks everybody for those comments, super chats, and please everyone else.
I dropped the link for I just realized I put it in the private chat. Look at me dropping stuff in the wrong place. Hold on. If folks, again, if anyone is free on Sunday at 6 p.m., we'll be hosting Brian Quoba to discuss Hubert Harrison and his book, and this is how the National Black Caucus of the Green Party is kicking off our Black History Month set of. We're gonna have some different things happening, but this is gonna be the first thing that we do. Not because I have any particular affinity to Black History Month, but because it's a good excuse to start doing stuff. I don't know if anybody noticed the new Target commercials, really focusing on, we're gonna support the Black people during this month.
Oh no, the marketing community knows what to do. They know exactly what to do.
So I was dying with laughter just thinking, I wonder if the DEI people are going to be like, oh, they capitulated. This is because we boycotted. Because
we won.
Because they still just don't get it.
Black History Month is a marketing campaign for advertisers. They're very clear on that. So there's going to be another round of that for sure. And Target, is
they'll be good at it as usual. Coming up, we've got Luna and EJ, and Alchemy is going to join. So that'll be next week. I will forewarn everybody for the future that we will be pre-recorded next week, but I'm sure we'll say it during the show. And then we're going to talk with the curator and the artist for the show in Massachusetts that's going to be using my article as part of the show. That'll be the following week. And then I just confirmed this morning that Isam, who just finished his dissertation, is going to come back to talk about Syria and some things that are happening there. So I'm very, very excited.
Word up.
Jared didn't even know that. I just found out before we came back. So we've got a lot upcoming. And I came across a very interesting reel that I have to send to you, Jared, because I think we need to find like a good white and have like a conversation about this reel that I came with. I actually was thinking about David Silberg, who's probably going to be dying with laughter when he hears his name right now. And I don't know if he'd want to come on, but we got to figure it out because it was a very interesting reel. I got to send it to you so you can watch it. Cause I was like, this is interesting, and I wonder how many people are thinking this way. And I think it's a good conversation. So, but I'll send it to you.
In
I'll send
search
it
of
to
the
you
good
later.
white. We're always looking. We always got our eyes open for one. So, you know. So look forward to that. So yeah, folks, please stay tuned. Make sure you have the bell rung, select all on the notifications. Make sure you are subscribed. Recheck all of these things because sometimes YouTube does funny things with these things. So double check your commitment to Black Liberation Media. And a big again salute to Lara and Samantha. Thanks again to Renee, to the undefeated chat. This has been 122 undefeated, uninterrupted episodes. And we end again by saying peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll see you next week with more Saturday with Renee.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.